Madhava Kunja Bihari
Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari
Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari
Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari
Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari
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 Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana
Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana
Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana
Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana
Yamuna Tira Vanachari
Yamuna Tira Vanachari
Yamuna Tira Vanachari
Yamuna Tira Vanachari
Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari
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 Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare
Jaya Radha Kunj Bihari Radha Kunj Bihari Radhe
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 Jaya Jagannatha Jaya Jagannatha Jaya Haladeva Mai Subhaja
Jaya Jagannatha Jaya
Gauranitai Jaya Gauranitai Jaya Gauranitai
Gauranitai Jaya Gauranitai Jaya Gauranitai Jaya Gauranitai
Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada
Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada
Jaya Gurudeva Jaya Gurudeva Jaya Gurudeva Jaya Gurudeva
Jaya Gurudeva Jaya Gurudeva Jaya Gurudeva Jaya Gurudeva
Harita Gaura Haribo 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 Nitya Gaura Haribo
Nitya Gaura Haribo 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 Nitya Gaura Haribo
Jai Harinama Sankirtana ki
Jai.
Srila Prabhupada ki
Jai.
Nanta Koti Vaishnavinda ki
Jai.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya
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 Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudiriye Nastaprayeshu Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Utama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naistiki Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurum Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamsha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunata Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamsta Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpa Tarubhyascha Krupa Sindhu Bhavacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Shri Vasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. This on speaker. Hare Krishna, everyone. So, welcome to our Bhakti Riksha study. So, last time we discussed this very inspiring verse from chapter 2 of Bhagavad Gita, verse number 40. And it said in there, in this endeavor there is no loss or diminution, and a little advancement on this path can protect one from the most dangerous type of fear. And he said our most dangerous type of fear should be that we lose this most precious opportunity we have been given in this rarest of rare human form of life. Amongst the 8.4 million species of life, only in the human form of life is one bestowed the higher intelligence to be able to inquire about how to find perfection of life. And with that rare gift of the human form of life, we have had the extraordinarily rare fortune to come in contact with the message of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, coming in Guru Parampara, by the mercy of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. And this fortune is incalculable. We cannot even begin to estimate how fortunate we are to have this access to this knowledge by which one can achieve complete freedom from birth, death, old age, and even disease, difficulties of the mind and body, of natural disasters, and of other living entities. All these difficulties, by the very potent message of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So, our greatest fear should be that we lose this opportunity, this gift that has been given to us. That is the dangerous fear that we should possess. But in this verse, Krishna is saying that in this endeavor, what endeavor? In the endeavor of Krishna consciousness, there is no loss or diminution. And whatever we do on this path, it is eternally ours. And that is what can protect us. Nothing else. Nothing else is going to protect us but our devotional service. And so, the beauty of Krishna consciousness is whatever we do, it is eternally ours. So we can have full faith to begin to practice devotional service. Because if I was going to build a house with lots of resources, but I was building it on a fault line in the earth, where an earthquake could destroy it to rubble in a few moments, my faith in building that house on that fault line is not so strong. Because I know all my efforts could be vanquished immediately, in a moment, unpredictable. But in Krishna consciousness, our faith can be very strong, because there is no loss or diminution. Even in next birth, one carries forward what they have. We gave the example of our bank accounts. Our bank accounts, no matter how rich you may be in this lifetime, in your next birth, what does your bank account start at? 0. You start all over again. Everything rewinds. But our spiritual bank account, if I completed 1%, as Srila Prabhupada says in the purport, in my next life, I begin at 1% and carry forward. So, there is the eternal nature, and it doesn't diminish. Even many, many lifetimes from now, it remains as it is. And so whatever deposits we make into our spiritual bank account, by the chanting of the holy names, by the reading of Srila Prabhupada's books, by the rendering of service, by the honoring of prasadam, all these aspects make eternal deposits into our bank account. And it's so potent that it can protect us from the most dangerous types of fear. And even a little advancement on this path can protect one. And that is what we are going to see shown very powerfully today. That how even a little bit of advancement can guarantee one's success. And so there's a very beautiful pastime in Srimad Bhagavatam. So today we'll be reading a little bit from the 6th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. And this 6th canto begins with the story of Ajamila. And Ajamila was referenced by Srila Prabhupada in the purport to the 40th verse within the Bhagavad Gita. So I thought we could spend today's session discussing the story of Ajamila and how it exemplifies this verse to perfection. How his little bit of advancement protected him in the greatest of ways, and how he was ultimately able to achieve perfection of life, even though there was a huge gap between his initial devotional service and his conclusion. And we'll see how potent the holy names are. That even if one unintentionally calls out to the names of the Holy Lord, one achieves benefit and can be protected. So we'll discuss that power here in the coming discussion today. So, chapter 1 is called The History of the Life of Ajamila. And I wanted to read just Srila Prabhupada's introduction to this chapter. It's about a page and a half, so bear with me. And then we'll discuss this story and also the very important meanings of it. Okay, so this is the introduction written by Srila Prabhupada to chapter 1. Throughout Srimad Bhagavatam, there are descriptions of 10 subject matters, including creation, subsequent creation, and the planetary systems. Shukadeva Goswami, the speaker of Srimad Bhagavatam, has already described creation, subsequent creation, and the planetary systems in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th cantos. Now in the 6th canto, which consists of 19 chapters, he will describe Poshana, or the protection by the Lord. The first chapter relates the history of Ajamila, who was considered a great sinful man, but he was liberated when 4 order carriers of Vishnu came to rescue him from the order carriers of Yamaraj. A full description of how he was liberated, having been relieved of the reactions of his sinful life, is given in this chapter. Sinful activities are painful both in this life and the next. Now we hear a very important and relevant statement for today's time. We should know for certain that the cause of all painful life is sinful action. On the path of fruit of work, one certainly commits sinful activities, and therefore, according to the considerations of Karma Kanda, different types of atonement are recommended. Such methods of atonement, however, do not free from ignorance, which is the root of sinful life. Consequently, one is prone to commit sinful activities even after atonement, which is therefore very inadequate for purification. On the path of speculative knowledge, one becomes free from sinful life by understanding things as they are. Therefore, the acquirement of speculative knowledge is also considered a method of atonement. While performing fruitive activities, one can become free from the actions of sinful life, through austerity, penance, celibacy, control of the mind and senses, truthfulness, and practice of mystic yoga. By awakening knowledge, one may also neutralize sinful reactions. Neither of these methods, however, can free one from the tendency to commit sinful activities. By bhakti yoga, one can completely avoid the tendency for sinful life. Other methods are not very feasible. Therefore, the Vedic literatures conclude that devotional service is more important than the methods of karma kanda and jnana kanda. Only the path of devotional service is auspicious for everyone. Fruitive activities and speculative knowledge cannot independently liberate anyone. But devotional service, independent of karma and jnana, is so potent that one who has fixed his mind at the lotus feet of Krishna is guaranteed not to meet the Yamudutas, the order carriers of Yamaraj, even in dreams. To prove the strength of devotional service, Shukadeva Goswami described the history of Ajamila. Ajamila was a resident of Kanyakabuj, the modern-day Kaunuj. He was trained by his parents to become a perfect Brahmana by studying the Vedas and following the regular principles. But because of his past, this youthful Brahmana was somehow attracted by a prostitute, and because of her association, he became most fallen and abandoned all regular principles. Ajamila begat in the womb of the prostitute 10 sons, the last of whom was called Narayan. At the time of Ajamila's death, when the order carriers of Yamaraj came to him to take him, he loudly called the name Narayan in fear because he was attached to his youngest son. Thus he remembered the original Narayan, Lord Vishnu. Although he did not chant the holy name of Narayan completely offensively, it acted nevertheless. As soon as he chanted the holy name of Narayan, the order carriers of Lord Vishnu immediately appeared on the scene. A discussion ensued between the order carriers of Lord Vishnu and those of Yamaraj. And by hearing the discussions, Ajamila was liberated. He could then understand the bad effect of fruitive activities and could also understand how exalted is the process of devotional service. So that's Srila Prabhupada's introduction to this chapter. So this 6th canto begins with an inquiry by by Parikshit Maharaj. So Parikshit Maharaj has heard towards the end of the 5th canto very hair-raising details of the punishments that are imposed upon the living entity when they commit sinful activities. And these punishments are equal in proportion to the sinful activity. But the punishments we read are very gruesome and very difficult to digest. They explain in so many details how one is forced to walk on hot stones, and I can't even go into all the details. So hair-raising it is. But this is the reaction from sinful activities. So Parikshit Maharaj, now remember, Parikshit Maharaj is on the verge of his own death. He is on the verge of his own death. But he is a pure Vaishnava. And one of the qualities of a devotee is they are para dukkha dukhi. It means the Vaishnava has no troubles. Even in the midst of so many material setbacks, bodily challenges and difficulties, the Vaishnava perceives no difficulty because their consciousness is on the platform of the soul. But the Vaishnava is very unhappy to see others in trouble. So they have no troubles themselves, but they are very unhappy to see the troubles of others. And this is the quality of a Vaishnava. So Parikshit Maharaj is asking Shukadeva Goswami how one can become free from these sinful reactions so they do not have to suffer as he so elaborately described in the 5th canto. Again, he has no worry himself, but this is the nature of a Vaishnava. He feels the discomfort of others. And so for our benefit, Parikshit Maharaj has inquired from Shukadeva Goswami how one can become free from these difficulties. So Shukadeva Goswami says that, or Parikshit Maharaj asks, "O greatly fortunate and opulent Shukadeva Goswami, now kindly tell me how human beings may be saved from having to enter into hellish conditions in which they suffer terrible pains." So this is the 6th verse of this 1st chapter, and the inquiry that sets up the ultimate narration of this pastime. Okay? So Shukadeva Goswami begins to speak that one must atone for his sins. If one performs a sinful activity, one must atone for them. Otherwise, they will have to suffer. And in the 8th verse, Shukadeva Goswami says, "Therefore, before one's next death comes, as long as one's body is strong enough, one should quickly adopt the process of atonement according to Shastra. Otherwise, one's time will be lost and the reactions of his sins will increase. As an expert physician diagnoses and treats a disease according to its gravity, one should undergo atonement according to the severity of one's sin." So Shukadeva Goswami is saying that yes, if you have committed sins, there are different shastric injunctions that you can do to atone for such sins. And based on the severity of what you have done, you should atone accordingly. Now, actually, Shukadeva Goswami, in answering in this way, is testing Parikshit Maharaj. Because in hearing this, Parikshit Maharaj replies that this type of atonement is useless. It doesn't work. Because you may go take bath in the Ganges, or you may perform various prayaschitta sacrifices to atone for sin. But there is a flaw. And he gives the example of the elephant. And he says this is like an elephant bath, these different types of atonement. Because an elephant very elaborately washes his body or her body in the lake. And after spending much time washing all the dirt off the body, as soon as the elephant emerges from the lake, what does it do? It covers itself again in dirt. So Shukadev Goswami, Parikshit Maharaj, is describing this Prayaschitta as an elephant bath. One sins and then atones. As soon as they atone, they sin again. Just as soon as the elephant emerges from the lake, they again becomes covered in dirt. So like this, Parikshit Maharaj is saying, this sinning and atoning doesn't really work. It has no value, because as soon as one atones, they again return through the sinful life. And thus they'll not be saved from these hellish conditions that were described. So Parikshit Maharaj is looking for more information, more knowledge. And in the 11th verse, then Shukadev Goswami says, what is real atonement? So in the 11th verse, Shukadev Goswami, the son of Vyasadeva, answered, my dear king, since acts meant to neutralize impious activities are also fruitive, they will not release one from the tendency to act fruitively. Persons who subject themselves to the rules and regulations of atonement are not at all intelligent. Indeed, they are in the mode of darkness. Unless one is freed from the mode of ignorance, trying to counteract one action through another is useless, because it does not uproot one's desires. Thus, even though one may superficially seem pious, he will undoubtedly be prone to act impiously. Therefore, real atonement is enlightenment in perfect knowledge, Vedanta, by which one understands the supreme absolute truth. So Shukadev Goswami acknowledges now, yes, this atonement is not very stable, because as soon as one atones, one will continue sinning again. Why? Because the desires to sin are not nullified. When one performs these sacrifices, the heart doesn't purify. So what is real atonement? Shukadev Goswami says, it's coming to knowledge about Krishna. And that knowledge about Krishna brings one to practice devotional service. So real atonement means to practice devotional service. And he says then that in the 19th verse, although having not fully realized Krishna, persons who have even once surrendered completely unto his lotus feet, and who have become attracted to his name, form, qualities, and pastimes, are completely freed of all sinful reactions. For they have accepted the true method of atonement. Even in dreams, such surrendered souls do not see Yamaraj or his order carriers, who are equipped with ropes to bind the sinful. So, Shukadev Goswami is saying that this is the power of Krishna consciousness. That even if one once surrenders to Krishna, they can become completely freed of all sinful reactions. And Shukadev Goswami goes on to explain that when one practices devotional service, the taste, the tendency to do sinful activities is removed. In no other process of purification is the tendency to commit sins removed. Other processes may remove the reactions, but the nature to do more sins is not removed. And thus, once one atones, they continue on sinning again. But in devotional service, it is so powerful, so potent, that it actually takes out the nature in the heart to perform sinful activities. Because as one begins to practice the blissful life of Krishna consciousness, automatically the taste for these sinful activities dissipates. And this is how powerful devotional service is. It is the perfect and only permanent means of atonement. And he goes on to glorify it in so many ways. Again, even a little bit of advancement can protect one, he says. Right? So then he begins to describe the story of Ajamil. And why does he describe the story of Ajamil? Because he wants to prove now how this actually happened. Because when we hear statements of philosophy, we sometimes wonder, how do we know that I can be saved just by devotional service? But when we hear about an story, an example of how one was saved, then it builds our confidence. So, Shukadev Goswami is now narrating a story from the Puranas to illustrate this philosophy of what is real atonement. And we're going to see how it exactly ties back to this verse that we just discussed from Bhagavad Gita, which a little bit of advancement can protect one from the greatest type of fear. And so this is the story of Ajamil. So this story carries on in chapter 1 and parts of chapter 2. Actually all of chapter 2 of this 6th canto. So Ajamil was born in a very wonderful circumstance. He had a wonderful mother and father who was a Brahmana and was performing great devotional service. And Ajamil was being trained very nicely. He had controlled mind and senses. He was very obedient to his mother, to his father, to his guru, following all the practices of Brahminical culture, and was living a very wonderful and pious life. And so this was his upbringing up until he was 18, 20 years old. Then one day, he was asked by his father to go to the forest to collect some flowers and some fruits and some kusha grass for some offering in puja, yagya, that was to take place in their home. So Ajamil, being a very young and nice, obedient son, went out to the forest. And there in the forest, we see that he came across one prostitute who was engaging in an embrace with her customer. And Ajamil, due to his great upbringing, knew that he should move away from such a situation. Seeing such a situation is not good for one's consciousness. So in this 62nd verse it says, as far as possible, he patiently tried to remember the instructions of Shastras, not even to see a woman. With the help of this knowledge and his intellect, he tried to control his lusty desires, but because of the force of Cupid within his heart, he failed to control his mind. And we see the very dangerous nature of what happens when we let our mind, our eyes, ears, tongue, our senses roam freely. That even though we have great knowledge of Shastra, great training and pedigree, one can be swept away if one is not very careful. A moment's association can tear apart one's progress. And so Ajamil, seeing this sight, left that scene. But he could not control his mind. And he began to think and meditate on this prostitute. And he became so lusty and so desirous that he finally went out and brought her into his home as a maidservant with his family. And he began to have relationships with this maidservant now. And slowly in time, he went on and he became so sinful and so uncontrolled senses that he left even his good wife and ran off with this prostitute. And with the inheritance of his father, who had since passed, he became so sinful that he did not even care for his mother and father in their old age. Lost all culture. Again, the danger of association. And he spent his whole inheritance on satisfying the needs and desires of this maidservant. And he, over many years, had 10 sons with this prostitute. And to support and maintain them, he was performing all kinds of sinful activities. After exhausting the wealth of his inheritance, he needed more money. And so he was stealing and robbing and cheating and performing anything and everything needed to satisfy his lusty desires. Explained that at the age of 80 years old, he had a young son. So you can see how long into his life these desires remained manifest. Again, this is how he had fallen from this very wonderful state of being born in this Brahminical family, following everything so righteously. And with just one moment, it was all lost. And the next 60 years, he lived full of sin. And who was tracking all of those sins? Yamaraj. Yamaraj is empowered by the Supreme Personality of Godhead to know all the activities of all the living entities, so that he may be able to reciprocate exactly according to one's activities. Not too much, not too little. So, Ajamila had become quite elderly. He was 80 or so years old, and his last son, his 10th son, he had named Narayan. And it's explained in Srimad Bhagavatam how he was walking a little bit loosely and not able to perform many activities, indicating he was quite young. We can say, 2 years old or so, very young child. At that age, having a young child. And being the youngest child, he was naturally very affectionate towards Narayan. And he would eat with him, he would chew foods and then offer to him. He would drink something and always think of Narayan. In this way, he was constantly engrossed in his youngest son. Very enamored. And he was so engrossed in his son that at a very elderly age, he was lying down. He did not realize that he was basically approaching death. And as he was about to leave his body, he sees 3 very fierce, ferocious personalities with ropes coming towards him. And who are those personalities? The Yamadutas, who are coming to take him, the soul, down to Yamaraj for the various punishments that Parikshit Maharaj had just heard. So the Yamadutas come, and seeing these very grotesque and fearsome personalities, Ajamila saw his son playing just nearby. And so out of protection for him, he called out to Narayan, 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 trying to get him to run away, to go away from this dangerous situation. So he was calling out, Narayan, Narayan, like that. So the Yamadutas are there, about to pull out the soul, as we see in this picture. But when Ajamila called out Narayan, the Vishnudutas came. And the 4 Vishnudutas came and said, stop! What are you doing? Now the Yamadutas, they have jurisdiction over all sinful people. But the Vishnudutas, they have jurisdiction over everyone, including Yamaraj. So the Vishnudutas stop the Yamudutas from taking the soul. So actually Ajamil has not yet died. He was just on the verge. And so the Yamudutas ask, who are you, personality so beautiful? You must be some demigod or sub-demigod or some coming from some great personality, some great devotee, very beautiful form, very effulgent, golden dhotis and forearms and beautiful features. And so the Vishnudutas explain that we have jurisdiction over this living entity, Ajamil. And the Yamaduta said, no way. This is a sinful person. And so the Vishnudutas then asked the Yamadutas, how do you determine who is to be punished and who is not to be punished? And so then the Yamadutas began to explain what they had learned, what they had understood from Yamaraj, of who is to be punished and who is not to be punished, based on Shastra, based on the different aspects of Dharma. What is to be done, what is not to be done. When one breaks those rules and regulations, one is not to be punished. So like this, the Yamadutas present their whole case of why Ajamil should be taken down to the hellish planets and given so much punishment. And they went and they relayed how he was plundering and how he left his family and gave up his duties to care for his parents, and he was stealing and cheating and all these things. They explained in great detail. And so the Vishnudutas understood everything. They heard everything. And then they responded. And they said that the Ajamil, and this is now in the 2nd chapter. So I'll just read a couple of these verses. They said, no, actually Ajamil has not done any sins because he has fully atoned. And so in the 7th verse of the 2nd chapter, the Vishnudutas say, Ajamil has already atoned for all his sinful actions. Indeed, he has atoned not only for sins performed in one life, but for those performed in millions of lives. For in a helpless condition, he chanted the holy name of Narayan, even though he did not chant purely, he chanted without offense, and therefore he is now pure and eligible for liberation. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada comments that Ajamil, and in the coming purports he describes, that Ajamil chanted the word Narayan, though he was not intending to call out to the Supreme Lord Narayan. He called out Narayan without any desire. He was not looking to chant Narayan to become free of his sins. That is one of the offenses to chanting the holy names of the Lord, to commit sinful activities on the strength of chanting. Oh, I have sinned yesterday, let me chant a little bit. That is a great sin. But that was not Ajamil's position. So Ajamil actually, in a very helpless condition, because he was being approached by the fearful Yamadutas, and he could not move because he was in a very, basically comatose type state. In that mood, he chanted out Narayan. Even though not intending to call out the Supreme Lord, that mood was collected as devotional service. This is how powerful the holy names are. The Vishnudutas continued in text 9 and 10. Hear how powerful chanting is. The chanting of the holy name of Lord Vishnu is the best process for atonement for a thief of gold or other valuables, for a drunkard, for one who betrays a friend or relative, for one who kills a brahmana, for one who indulges in sex with the wife of his guru or another superior. It is also the best method of atonement for one who murders women, the king or his father, for one who slaughters cows, and for all other sinful men. Simply by chanting the holy names of Lord Vishnu, such sinful persons may attract the attention of the Supreme Lord, who therefore considers, because this man has chanted my holy names, My duty is to give him protection. How powerful the holy names are. Even if performing these types of activities, the Lord protects. So what is the source of our protection? Anything but the holy names? Nothing. Nothing. These glorification of the holy names continue. I'll just read a few of them. But if I encourage you all to read these verses, the first 20 or so verses in this second chapter. They're so powerful. At the time of death, Ajamila helplessly and very loudly chanted the holy name of the Lord Narayan. The chanting alone has already freed him from the reactions of all sinful life. Therefore, O servants of Yamaraj, do not try to take him to your master for punishment in hellish conditions. One who chants the holy name of the Lord is immediately freed from reactions of unlimited sins, even if he chants indirectly to indicate something else, jokingly, for musical entertainment, or even neglectfully. This is accepted by all learned scholars of the scriptures. So even that he was chanting indirectly, calling out his son instead of Supreme Lord, it still has the potency. And then the Vishnu Dutas go on to explain why that's the case. If one chants the holy names of the Lord and then dies because of an accidental misfortune, such as falling from the top of a house, slipping, and suffering broken bones while traveling on a road, being bitten by a serpent, being afflicted with pain and high fever, or being injured by a weapon, one is immediately absolved from having to enter into the hellish world, even though he is sinful. Chanting the Hare Krishna mantra, however, vanquishes all the effects of sinful activities, regardless of whether heavy or light. So regardless of whether it is heavy or light. And then there was one more verse I wanted to read. This is the powerful verse number 19. If a person unaware of the effective potency of a certain medicine takes that medicine or is forced to take it, it will act even without his knowledge because its potency does not depend on the patient's understanding. Similarly, even though one does not know the value of chanting the holy name of the Lord, if one chants knowingly or unknowingly, the chanting will be very effective. So this is how potent the holy names of the Lord are. Even if you chant the names jokingly, or you chant them without knowing its benefit, just like if a doctor gives you some medicines and you don't know what the medicines are, but if you take them, it will still cure you. Or another example is given, if you don't know whether fire will burn you or not, whether you know or not, if you put your hand in the fire, you will be burned. So similarly, this chanting is so powerful, so potent, that even unknowingly, even indirectly, even jokingly, the benefit is there. How much benefit? He became relieved from all sins, not just in this lifetime, from millions of lifetimes. And under whose authority? The Vishnu Dutas, who are in charge of taking the living entity back home, back to Godhead. So, this is now, the story continues, that Ajamila, after hearing in an unconscious state this dialogue between the Yamadutas and Vishnudutas, awoke. The Yamadutas left, knowing they had no jurisdiction over Ajamila. And he was about to speak Ajamila to the Vishnudutas, and they immediately disappeared. But by hearing from the mouths of the pure devotees, the Vishnudutas, Ajamila regained his spiritual nature. All that he had done in his earlier part of his life, was not lost. There was no loss or diminution. Because of that piety, he had the fortune to name his son Narayan, and he had the fortune to call out Narayan to come and be in the association of the Vishnu Dutas. And there he regained his life force. He went straight to Haridwar, and there he began to practice intense devotional service. And he says, were it not for my past devotional service, how could I, a most unclean keeper of a prostitute, have gotten an opportunity to chant the holy name of Vaikuntapati when I was just ready to die? Certainly it would not have been possible. I am such a sinful person, but since I have gotten this opportunity, I must completely control my mind, life, and senses, and always engage in devotional service, so that I may not fall again into the deep darkness and ignorance of material life. And so, Ajamil began to practice intense devotional service. And shortly thereafter, the Vishnu Dutas came back. Ajamil regained his eternal spiritual body, boarded the aeroplane, brought down by the Vishnu Dutas, and they took him back to the spiritual world. This is the potency of devotional service, the power of the holy names. The greatest fear Ajamil was protected from, losing the opportunity he had been given in his early childhood. And that was done by this power of the holy names. So we can imagine if Ajamil received such blessings and such purification with unknowingly calling out to the holy names of the Lord, what benefit we may get when we attempt to please the Lord by chanting the holy names of the Lord. Many, many, many more times benefit. And that is why we are so encouraged to take to the process of chanting. It is our only protection. And it is so powerful, so potent. And whenever we lose some faith in the power of the holy names, just read this section. Read those verses in the second chapter. And they will inspire us. Wow, so powerful. And we can take to this process of chanting. Because as Krishna said, there is no loss or diminution. Everything is there. And this story that Shukadev Goswami was illustrating was to show that the only way to really atone for one's sins is by the practice of devotional service. But far superior to even atoning for the sins is the result of being able to engage in loving service with Krishna. Yes, bhakti will eliminate all past sins. But even more powerful than that is it removes the tendency in the heart for future sins, which no other process can do. But even more beneficial than that is one experiences an eternal life of bliss and happiness in loving relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And it begins and it ends with the chanting of the holy names. The chanting of the holy names. The chanting of the holy names. There is no other way. There is no other way. There is no other way. Harinama, 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 Eva Kevalam, Kalo Nashteva, 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 Gatiranyata. And so this is the story of Ajamil, and a very instructive pastime, how there is no loss or diminution, and the potency of the holy names. So thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda ki. Any questions or comments? Yes.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Prabhuji. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much for such a nice class. So, from this story, I'm wondering that though Ajamil is born and brought up in such a wonderful and like nice family. How come the one moment can change the mind so drastically?
Yeah.
So if that can happen to such a nice person, the people like especially like us, how we will um, try to face this kind of a things
Yeah.
in the real world.
Yeah, no, it's a nice question. So, just for the audience online, the question was, if Ajamil, having such a wonderful upbringing, could lose it all with just a moment of bad association, then what hope we have of trying to remain in this process of devotional service, and how we can, be protected. So, a few things in the verses we did not discuss in the purport. It's expressed that Ajamil became attracted due to some prior nature. So though he was born in a very nice family, he still had the prior nature of this attraction, and that nature was rekindled by this sight of the prostitute with her customer. So that is the source of that transgression was his prior nature. Now, what we can do? Well, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that my devotee never perishes. And he says, Arjuna, you declare loudly that my devotee never perishes. Even if he falls down and commits the greatest of mistakes, as long as he remains in devotional service and he remains remorseful, lamenting his mistake, so is not casual, then Krishna is giving the assurance that his devotee is protected. And as we see here, even ultimately, Ajamil was protected. He was given the great opportunity to undo everything he had done. So, but Krishna gives us the assurance that the devotee never perishes. So we should have great faith that if one makes a mistake, and Prabhupada speaks in these purports about that yes, in the practice of devotional service, one may make a mistake, one may temporarily lose their grounding, but one should just remain steady in their devotional service. And by the practice of bhakti, even that mistake can be overcome. But one must be very careful not to then take that as a license to make mistakes. Meaning, oh, bhakti is so powerful, I can be lackadaisical, lazy with my control. So we should not be overly fearful. Oh my God, what happens if I make a mistake? I'm doomed. No. Know that bhakti is so powerful, it can overcome mistakes. But we should not be lax in thinking, oh, because I have strong bhakti, I don't need to be so careful. So we should be very careful. We should be mindful and thoughtful that, yeah, this can happen to us. Sometimes we ask the question, oh, what's the harm? What's the harm of doing this activity or that activity? Well, we see the harm now. The potential is one can lose their way. But if we remain in association with the devotees, we remain fixed in the process of devotional service. As Krishna says in the 9th chapter, my devotee never perishes. So he takes faith in Krishna's guarantee that if we remain in bhakti, we'll be protected. So that's how we can navigate it. Be mindful and thoughtful that everything we have worked for, we could, risk it, but be confident that if something happens, I will remain in bhakti and I will overcome even that. Okay?
Thank you, Babaji. So into the same, like you talked about self-control, right? I probably feel that this is the most difficult part in the world. So what I mean to say is, when know that, okay, like I want to eat something, so I am not able to control my sense. But when you do it, okay, after that you realize that you are doing a mistake. But you know, it's happening, you know. So how will you know that this is wrong, but sometimes it's like a battle between your mind and intelligence. And sometimes your intelligence loses it because your mind is so powerful, have that kind of a desire that so after that you feel that no, this I should not have done it. So probably at that particular moment when you know that when you are in a dilemma kind of a situation, how will you make always intelligence will win?
Yes. Yeah, so a few things. One, remember that sense control only happens when we actually engage the senses in something more superior. So our ability to restrain various activities is only going to happen when we have something better we can do. That is the higher taste, right? This param drishta nivartate. That when I have a higher taste, then it becomes very easily and one naturally can control the taste for the lower things. Right? I always give the example of exchanging a $5 bill for a $50 bill. If you have a $5 bill, you don't want to let it go. It's yours, it's valuable. But if someone says, I'll exchange that 5 for a 10 or 5 for a 50, you'll very easily exchange it because you're trading something of lower value for higher value. So similarly, these different things that we are attracted to, by the process of devotional service, we will begin to experience a higher taste. And so those tastes will naturally dissipate. So instead of trying to stop the process of those, instead what we do is we try to add more bhakti. That's why we say devotional service, it is an additive process, not a subtractive process. Meaning by adding more bhakti into our life, slowly these material desires will dissipate. Now don't expect that overnight all these desires are going to be gone. Okay, I'm chanting now, everything is... We have developed these tastes over millions of lifetimes. So just keep trying, keep doing your best you can, and keep adding and increasing devotional service in your life. And as you do, you will naturally, Prabhupada says, without effort even, be able to abstain from these lower sense pleasures. Why? Because one now is experiencing such higher taste. Once you have eaten warm, hot, fluffy puris, who wants a dry, stale chapati? But if you don't have any bread, then even a dry, stale chapati feels good and better than nothing. Right? So, right now, the material sense pleasures are like the dry, stale chapati. That's the best we can find. But as we begin to experience more Krishna consciousness, we'll enjoy the pleasures of devotional service, because remember, the bliss in bhakti is like unlimited, like an ocean. Whereas if you take all the pleasures of the material world and you combined it, our Shastra explains, it would fill up water as much as can be held in the hoof print of a calf. That's how much happiness there is in the material world. The water contained within a hoof print of a calf. Whereas the happiness from bhakti is an ocean, an unlimited ocean. So we just have to experience it. And no, you're not going to be perfect day 1, day 2, or even day 3. But as long as one is sincerely trying, chanting, and taking to the process of bhakti, it will happen in time. So remain committed. Don't become discouraged by these lapses that may happen, but become mindful of them. Oh, I need to stop this, and know that this is a sign I should increase my bhakti. And by increasing bhakti, this stopping will naturally happen. Trying to stop it artificially is impossible. So the means is by adding, one will subtract it. Okay?
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hare Krishna. Thank you for your nice questions.
Thank you.
There's a question online. Can you speak about the dynamics between quality of chanting and the performance of devotional service?
Yes, so the dynamics of quality of chanting and what is it? The dynamics of
performance.
And the performance of devotional service.
Okay. Who's the question by?
Nahush, Prabhu?
Yes. So the quality of chanting is a lifelong endeavor that we want to try to increase the quality of our chanting. And what does quality of our chanting mean? It means that we are in meditation on the holy names. We are hearing each of the 16 words, 32 syllables of the Mahamantra. And our mind is fixated on the names, forms, pastimes, and qualities of the Supreme Lord. So that is quality. Quality means how much am I remembering Krishna while I'm chanting? The more I'm remembering, the more quality of my chanting. Prabhupada said one should be chanting in a prayerful mood. As a young child cries out to his mother, we should be crying out to Krishna. Right? So that is the quality of chanting. And our devotional service, the center, the core of all devotional service is chanting. Everything else we do in devotional service is meant to increase the quality of our chanting, actually. When we read Shastra, it is to inspire our faith to take to the process of chanting the holy names. When we render service to the deities, when we honor prasadam, all of the different aspects of devotional service. In Nectar of Devotion, there are 64 angas of Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti. But ultimately, they're meant to bring us to good chanting. Because this is the essence of all devotional service. Right? So we perform other aspects of devotional service as a means to increase our attraction to Krishna, and that increased attraction will lead to better quality chanting. Because whatever I'm attracted to, that I will meditate upon. If I'm attracted to my wealth, I will not stop thinking about my wealth. If I'm attracted to some beautiful person, that's what I will think about. Whatever I'm attracted to, I will meditate on. So, increasing our attraction to Krishna is what will increase the quality of our chanting. And that is why we read, that is why we do different types of services, but it's ultimately centered around good chanting. And so the core of our devotional service should be our chanting, and everything else should build upon that. That is the foundation. That is the inner core. Okay? Any other questions or comments? Okay. So please read these sections in Srimad Bhagavatam if you're so inspired. They're very, very sweet. We just gave a synopsis of this, and the purport Srila Prabhupada has written are very, very detailed and very full of great philosophy. So, okay.
Prabhuji,
Yes.
is it, in the 6th canto, is it? Or
Yes.
which one?
6th canto, 1st and 2nd chapters. Yep. And the specific glories of the holy name are in the 2nd chapter, versus, basically the first 19 verses.
Okay. And one more thing, Prabhuji, just you had mentioned when we were discussing that you said particularly when we were talking about the potency of the holy name, just chanting even once, even though he did it in a purified way, not intentionally, all that, and then he still went to Godhead. So all of us chanting so many times, so definitely then we should be expecting that kind of goal, even though it's not so purified, or how does it work?
Well, remember, he didn't go back to Godhead immediately, right? So the Vishnudutas did not take him directly back to Godhead. He regained his embodied form and then went to Haridwar and performed pure devotional service. So his chanting put him on the path to then be able to practice pure devotional service. And by completing pure devotional service, he then went back to Godhead. So Ajamil's the great fortune was he regained his consciousness, right? He was about to leave his body. The Yamadutas were about to extract the soul from the body. But actually he was not yet leaving the body. So that is what happened. So, and for us, Ajamil chanted without offense because he had no desire in chanting the holy name, right? His desire was out of love in a very helpless condition, calling out to Narayan, his son. So there was no misintention. There was no, Krishna, I'm chanting your names to protect me. And Krishna, I'm chanting your names, so that I can become free of sins. Krishna, I'm chanting your names, but I don't know what they are, and I'm chanting other names too. Like, there was no other offenses. So that's why it carried such potency. So that's why before we chant the holy names of the Lord, we recite the 10 offenses to chanting, right? To remind us, okay, this is what I'm trying to protect from. And that is why before we chant, we recite the Panchatattva mantra to obtain the mercy of Panchatattva, so that we may try to chant offenselessly, right? So that is the way. And your question, though, is, yes, you're guaranteed to go back home, back to Godhead in this lifetime if we follow the process, because that is a guarantee Srila Prabhupada gave. He gave that guarantee. So, yes, it can happen. And remember, one only needs to chant the name of Krishna purely once to achieve perfection. Now we are chanting, 1,728 times a day, and still something is happening. Well, we are someday hoping we can chant just once the name of Krishna purely, and everything is there. So just keep chanting and have faith in this process, and know that it is working extraordinarily well, and by the mercy of Srila Prabhupada, we'll all achieve perfection of life.
Thank you, Prabhuji, for the enlightening lecture. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Prabhuji, sorry.
Yes.
As Mataji asked, onto the same line of, so how we will feel, or how we will come to know that our quality of chanting is improving?
Yeah. So we'll know the quality of chanting is improving as we begin to develop some attachment and attraction to the chanting. Because there's the spirit soul is naturally attracted to Krishna. That is the intrinsic nature of the soul. And so, remember I gave the example long ago of if I have two magnets. Those two magnets are naturally attracted to each other. But if I have 100 sheets of paper in between those two magnets, I cannot feel that attraction. But as I start to remove those sheets of paper one by one, I start to feel some tug and pull between those two magnets. And as I keep removing, and ultimately that last piece of paper is removed, the magnets stick to each other. That attraction was there when the 100 sheets of paper were there, but it was not perceptible. Similarly, our attraction to Krishna is the nature, that's the intrinsic nature of us. But we're not perceiving it yet because we have all the impurities of the heart. And that's why Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, Chaito Darpana Marjanam, that we must cleanse the mirror of the heart. So, how do I know that I'm chanting good? That my attraction for chanting should increase in time. Right now, we're chanting because we have understood something about its importance. And we are doing so, I would say, somewhat out of surrender to Sadhu and Shastra, Guru Sadhu Shastra. Right? They are inspiring that this is the right path. So we are doing it. It is not yet self-internally motivated. We are hoping to come to that process as we begin to experience it. Right? So you'll see your quality improving by your attraction for the holy names. And the more you become attracted, the more your quality will improve. And the more your quality improves, the more your attraction, because you're removing more and more of the impurities of the heart, right? So it's like a cycle. So in the beginning, by chanting under the guidance of Guru and Shastra, one becomes empowered to have this effect, even though one doesn't have the natural kind of instinct for chanting. But that will come. And at some point, when one becomes fully free of all the anarthas and becomes fixed in chanting, one will then actually taste the sweetness of the holy names. And that sweetness is so extraordinary that when you taste the name Krishna once, you want to taste it again. Krishna, Krishna. You can't stop because it's so pleasurable. Then you begin to lament, why only have one tongue? I want millions of tongues so I can chant Krishna. It's so sweet. The taste becomes so extraordinary. And then one becomes addicted to chanting. There is no alarm clock to get us up. There is no counting how many times I've chanted. We just chant because it happens so naturally, right? So that is where the chanting will ultimately end. But we are beginning in a very early stage, right? In a very beginning stage. So just keep chanting, and as your quality improves, you'll notice a more attraction, more sincerity in chanting. And how to improve quality, since we're talking about that. There are some good principles. Having regulated times when we chant is very important. Anything that we do that we want to do well, we do with some regulation, right? A great athlete, they practice a certain number of hours a day. They follow a very strict diet. They are very disciplined in their approach in order to perfect their art, whatever it may be. Any student who really wants to do well academically has very good study habits. They study very regularly, precisely, without distraction. They have good habits. Anything we want, we have to be disciplined in the process. So if we want to be good in chanting, we have to apply those same principles. They're no different. We have to be sincere, precise, very thoughtful. So setting a specific time in the day that I'm going to chant and I'm not going to do anything else. Put my cell phone away, put the computer away, put everything else away. And just I'm going to focus on my chanting. Just as a good student puts away all the other distractions in studies, the aspiring devotee who wants to chant nicely puts away all their distractions and takes to the process of chanting. Right? One, tries to chant out loud and hear the names of the Lord, seeing the pictures of the Lord, these different processes. We have a whole seminars on good chanting that we can speak about later. But these are some of the practices. But we have to have first an intention to chant better. If there's intention to chant better, then the actions will follow.
Thank you, Babaji. Thank you so much.
Hare Krishna. Thank you for wonderful questions on chanting. These are the best questions.
Oh, thank you, Babaji. We don't want the class to end only, Babaji. It's so nice.
Well, more questions? We can keep going, no problem.
Yeah, Babaji, we are really missing face-to-face classes,
Yes, I am very dearly missing all of you. I cannot say my heart is lamenting not being able to be in all of your association. But we can be in association together by chanting together, by reading together, and being one in purpose of trying to advance. So please don't let this momentary lapses of physical association lessen our enthusiasm in the practice of devotional service. Instead, we should increase our devotional practices and pray to Krishna that we may again very soon be in association together where we can continue this wonderful journey of Krishna consciousness. So let us pray all together with great sincerity. It can happen tomorrow, because with the will of Krishna, anything can happen.
Haribol. Haribol. Thank you. Thank you, Bobby.
Hare Krishna. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Okay. Well, thank you very much again for your kind attention, and we'll talk again next week. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Jai.
Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda ki jai. Hare Krishna.